The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Gwilda Wiyaka's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the Science of Magic or endorsed in any manner by Gwilda Wiyaka, Relmar McConnell Media Company, its affiliated networks, stations, or employees. Welcome to the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, a program dedicated to uncovering the unified nature of reality and humanity's ever-evolving place as truly galactic beings. For more information on the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit us online at www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Welcome to the Science of Magic, a place where science and magic come together to transform fact into evolving truth. We're coming to you through the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net, and can also be found on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. This hour we'll be exploring Don't Leave Me. Whether we realize it or not, we've all suffered abandonment. Originally, abandonment this lifetime began when we left spirit to incarnate. As a shamanic practitioner, I've worked with people with abandonment issues for over 40 years, and I found separation trauma at birth to be nearly universal. It was particularly traumatic for those of us born in the day and age when our mothers were drugged, whether they wanted to be or not, and our fathers were banished from the delivery room. During a personal shamanic session, I accessed the memory of my birth. The doctor picked me up by the ankles and actually swatted my behind. Until that session, I thought that was just a myth. In my recall of the event, I was furious and wanted to gum him for the indignity. I was lucky to be a girl. Boys of that era were strapped to a circumcision board fresh out of the womb and circumcised without the benefit of anesthesia. After all, newborn babies don't feel pain, right? Then we were promptly ushered off to the nursery, scrubbed up, and if we were lucky, bottle-fed sugar water, while our poor fathers looked on through the thick glass. With no nursing or bonding, we were left to wail our little hearts out for hours until we finally gave up. Once a baby gives up, the soul loss is so extreme, they're unable to truly bond. To Dr. Spock's delight, these babies had to be bottle-fed as they often could not learn to nurse. We grew up thinking this disconnect is normal, never realizing we're capable of much more intimacy than we experience. Happily, birthing practice have drastically changed for the better. Yet, even if the birth experience is ideal, we come in with abandonment issues. Why? The physicality of Earth is a low-frequency, polarized, segregated environment. Spirit is such a high frequency, it's unified. In spirit, there is no separation. To enter the physical, we not only have to separate from unity, but from a goodly portion of our original frequency. Adding to the problem, those present at our birth have been further fragmented over their lifetime and haven't the frequency to match that of the infant. When our frequency is unmet, we have no agreement or resonance to sustain it. We fragment further until eventually we match the common denominator frequency of society at the time of our birth. This results in the spiritual illness known as that shaman calls soul loss. Don't get me wrong, one never really loses a piece of their eternal soul. Soul loss refers to a disconnect from a portion of one's natural frequency. Soul loss is often the result of not only the trauma of original separation, but also the numerous traumas along one's life path. When we've suffered abandonment, we become controllable. All a person needs to do is to get us to comply is to threaten to leave us. Withdrawal of love and approval is devastating to one carrying this damage and has been used as a common parenting tactic, creating further abandonment issues. As adults, we control each other in the same way. It often happens that even if someone is steadfastly there for us, we push them away rather than risk the pain of further abandonment. How sad that we actually end up isolating ourselves. Now that I've painted this grim picture, let's look at the bright side. The solar system is entering a more luminescent era of the galaxy, and the planet's ambient frequencies are rising. This presents the unique opportunity to reconnect with some of our lost frequency and therefore ourselves and each other. There is a price to be paid. We have to engage our own healing, actively cooperate with the process now available. Once practicing offering a position for frequency healing is the ancient form of shamanism. A universal component of all shamanic practices is a healing form known as soul retrieval, whereby the practitioner helps the client reconnect with their lost frequency at the quantum level. Given the current scarcity of shaman, it's fortunate there are many fine practices and tools to help us along our evolutionary path to unity. Our guest this hour, Susan Anderson, is the author of the Abandonment Recovery Workbook. After this break, I'll introduce Susan and we'll unveil the anatomy of abandonment and explore some methods of recovery. So don't leave me. You're listening to The Science of Magic. Prior innovative episodes can always be found on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour, Susan Anderson, is the author of the Abandonment Recovery Workbook, as well as Training Your Outer Child and the Journey from Abandonment to Healing. The founder of Outer Child and Abandonment Recovery Movements, she's devoted the past 30 years of clinical experience and research to helping people resolve abandonment and overcome self-sabotage. Susan, thank you so much for joining us on our Science of Magic.
Well, thank you for having me.
What drew you to working with abandonment?
I've started working with abandonment as someone who went through my own abandonment. I had been a psychotherapist for 20 years, sort of looking at people, at all my clients, through the lens of abandonment, because I understood exactly what you were talking about in the first segment, about how we all have a primal birth trauma, and it creates a fear that glues the human race together. It's something that we all have in common and helps us to have enough of that fear to want to stay together and form very good bonds and be good to each other and cooperate and have human communities and human pairing and human family. So it's a positive force, but it also is a fear that can be easily triggered. So I was looking at my clinical work with that lens when suddenly the love of my life left me for another woman. And my marital partner of 18 years, I loved him so much, and he was gone. So that really propelled me into a major research kind of endeavor and helped me to discover a whole new path to healing.
And it's interesting that you'd say that about the human race, because we can't survive without each other, as a tribal community from, the caveman days. And so how much of abandonment do you think is actually natural survival instinct?
Well, I think it is natural, because as we have to be born, and the birth process, as you described it so vividly, involves separation from something that was wonderfully comfortable and that just was homeostatic, that met our needs, and we were just floating in this perfect environment. And then all of a sudden, we're out in the cold, in some cases spanked as you were, upside down, and then once again we're enveloped into the nurse's arms, or the mother's arms, depending on your situation, your birthing situation. And then, the relief of being returned to the warmth. And then suddenly now you're in a bassinet, and your diaper's wet, and you're cold again. And then suddenly along comes warm arms and a breast, and the hunger and the cold go away again. And we experience these on and off separation, connection, disconnection, connection, and it creates a universal fear of having the thing that's giving us support torn away. It's just natural. It's unavoidable. We could have perfect parents and still have a natural fear that, what I love and what gives me warmth can leave. It can die. It can leave me. It can disappear on me, because we had that experience from infancy onward. So it's just natural. And yet it's also beneficial to the human race, because it's what bonds us together. It's what, causes conflict and sometimes tears us apart, but it also is the glue that holds the human race together.
Amazing. It occurs to me that there's more forms of abandonment than most people think. Would you mind outlining where a lot of abandonment issues can originate beyond the birth?
Yes. Well, we all suffered abandonment scenarios in growing up, in infancy and toddlerhood and so forth. You can't really escape it. You could have everything going fine for you, but one day, your mother is late picking you up at the nursery school, or your parents have another baby, and suddenly you're relegated to a slightly lesser position, let's say, or you perceive it that way. We can't escape it. We all have little hurts, but some of us have more than others. Some of us grew up in a family where the parents were alcoholic, which means that there was this kind of a chronic abandonment. They were there, but they weren't emotionally there. There were many unfulfilled promises kind of thing. Some of us grew up in families where there was divorce. Some of us grew up in foster homes. Some of us grew up where one of the parents died, or where the father suddenly left and you never really had a strong relationship with him again, even if the two of you tried. We come from so many different backgrounds, some of which are pretty traumatic for a child. So abandonment can stem from the birth trauma, from all those little, for just being a human being and having human nature and worrying about, losing what we love. And then it also can stem from all the little traumas that we went through, and it's cumulative. So that when we reach adulthood, when something triggers that recollection of all the times we've lost and felt disconnected and felt less than, when something happens that triggers that accumulation of experiences, it brings it all up, and it makes it a very large feeling. So abandonment is a cumulative wound. Mm-hmm. And if everything's going fine, it's not triggered. But if we suddenly don't get invited to a party that we thought was a good friend, or other people are getting recognition at work and we're not, or if the person we're interested in isn't calling back, or something of that sort, these even small triggers can create a big feeling. And it makes us feel, I'm too emotional, I'm too vulnerable, there's something wrong with me. So then there's self-abandonment going on, where we're disappointed in our own personal strength and fortitude, and so we have self-doubt and doubt ourselves.
Do you think that abandonment in childhood could set a person up for repeated abandonment later in life? And if so, how does that work?
Yeah, it works the way that trauma works, because of course, there's a post-traumatic stress disorder of abandonment. That is, in fact, mentioned, and these characteristics of it are listed in the workbook. And when it means that there'll be a post-traumatic response to that, And, in the field of trauma, it's called repetition compulsion. You keep repeating it over and over again. And the way that manifests with abandonment is that many ways. In adulthood, you tend to grab for immediate gratification instead of reaching your goals, and then that's another way of abandoning yourself. Or you get caught up in relationships where you keep getting abandoned over and over again. I call that abandaholism, where you're attracted to the unavailable. When somebody is available, you don't feel any chemistry, but when they are sort of emotionally aloof and detached, or they're on and off again kind of thing, then you get hooked into a relationship where you can keep feeling abandoned over and over again, and that is post-traumatic to earlier times of abandonment, most likely.
So that kind of results in what I call having a broken picker. In other words, you pick all the wrong people and just keep getting re-injured.
Yes, you're attracted to people who remind you of that feeling of insecurity. So if somebody doesn't make the hackles go up on the back of your neck, you think you're not attracted. The brain gets tricked into thinking that if something can make you feel insecure and, wanting and yearning for something and not quite being able to get it, that's love, that's attraction. But if something makes you feel, comfortable, calm, connected in a sort of a very, smooth, easy way, that's not attraction. That's just platonic feelings. So that people actually are attracted to that which creates insecurity, and that's what breaks the picker. The chooser.
I got it. In my practice, I've also noticed that it can have a reverse effect. In other words, fear of abandonment can cause some people to push the ones closest to them away, even actively alienate them. And have you seen that? And if so, what do you think? What's operating there?
Well, there's something I call abandophobism, and it is when you're so afraid of abandonment that you avoid relationships altogether, and this can take the extreme of pushing people away who try to get in. Because, if as they get closer to you, they also get closer to your wound, you see, because the wound is right there, and it's very tender to the touch. So if somebody comes close and they touch you, but they touch your wound as well, ouch. And so, I'm too vulnerable, I have to push them away. So I call that also, I did not invent the term, emotional anorexia or emotional bulimia, where you can't receive love because it's too threatening, and you throw it up, you throw it back out, you get rid of it, you push it away, you refuse it, you don't go near it, and it's a very common problem out there that many people cannot tolerate until they get into recovery, abandonment recovery. They cannot tolerate the vulnerability of letting somebody get close.
Mm. Have you seen people being manipulated through their abandonment issues? And would you address this, how we can tell it's happening, what we can do about it?
Oh, well, in a relationship, you quickly learn, it's almost an instinct, who's got the greatest abandonment fear in that relationship. And then you learn you can literally control the other person by using their fear of abandonment against them. Since we all have fear of abandonment, it's the card that either side can play. And the bad part of it is the people who are using fear of abandonment as a controlling factor, as a hammer, are doing it sometimes deliberately, and sometimes they don't even realize that they're playing the abandonment card in order to control you. But it happens in couples all the time. And once you become aware of the fact that it's very widespread and that it very well might be happening in your relationship and you're on the lookout for it, you might be able to see it happening live. You might see yourself doing it. It's not something that only bad abandoners do. We all do this to some extent. So when you see it happening to you, you can simply say to the person, please, let's not play the abandonment card. It's too heavy a weapon. Let's not go to war in that way. or you can bring it to that person's awareness. But if the person isn't cooperating and isn't even willing to look at that and uses it deliberately, well, then you might be looking at a relationship that's not good for you.
And so you could be looking at one of those relationships where your picker's broke and you're recreating the damage, yes?
You're recreating the damage. You've picked another person who's learned how to abuse you and control you. It's abusive to threaten abandonment when if you really think that something is a deal breaker and you're going to be forced to probably have to leave the relationship. It's only fair to give your partner, advance notice.
A heads up, yeah. We're going to have to take a break. We're going to have to take a break. Susan and I will return to our discussion after this short break. You're listening to The Science of Magic on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Previous broadcasts of thought-provoking episodes can always be found on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. We will be back, so don't you go away. The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State-certified occupational school, training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, a place where magic and science come together to promote enlightenment. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour, Susan Anderson, is the author of Abandonment Recovery Workbook, as well as Taming Your Outer Child and the Journey from Abandonment to Healing. Her website is www.abandonment.net. Susan, I've got a biggie for you here.
Okay.
It occurs to me that abandonment impacts us on all four levels: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. Would you mind addressing the four?
Oh, yes, it does. It's multidimensional. It affects everything. Well, physically, if you are going through a breakup, you are having a biophysiological crisis. It is the withdrawal that you experience when you're coming off of heroin because you're needing a love fix and not being able to have it. There are all kinds of, in addition to the opiates that are missing in your body and the addiction is craving the love fix, in addition to that, there are all the stress hormones that are involved. So that's if you're going through an acute abandonment, but if you're going through a chronic abandonment, which people do if let's say they have childhood issues of abandonment, and as adults, they're having trouble finding a relationship. They're having trouble staying in a relationship, or they're having trouble feeling secure, when they're in a relationship. So people who have those more chronic types of abandonment issues, also, this is felt on a feeling level, on a biophysiological feeling level. The emotional impact is what we're really talking about, the awful feelings, the feelings of self-depreciation, and I'm not enough, and I'll never find someone, or, why have I been discarded and disposed, and all those awful feelings that have to do with the ego really being so wounded, and also the abject loss, the loneliness, the isolation. And then on the spiritual level, there is a rumination, an obsession that brings us to our head and gets us far afield from our spiritual being. And so one of the prescriptions for abandonment recovery is to actually get into the moment, to use all of the meditative tools, yoga, relaxation exercises, any of those major tools that are so effective that we've hopefully learned how to use, and we use those to get ourselves into the moment, because in that moment we come out of the obsession and we realize that we are able to stand on our own 2 feet as a tiny spark in the universe that can exist and behold the entire universe and all of its bounty, and we can observe what's happening sort of on the physical plane as being less painful. It may only last a few seconds because the physical and the emotional pull us right back in again to the obsessional, because the mind is just working all the time. But that doesn't mean we have to stay stuck in it all the time. It means that it's a spur to remind us to get back into the moment, into the sheer magical moment of now, where we can actually tune into the moment of life with sights and sounds and the sensations in our body. Feel our heart ticking, feel ourselves breathing.
That's
and
amazing.
Those are 3 levels. I think I'm omitting a level. Physical,
Let's see.
emotional, and
We said physical,
spiritual.
emotional, mental, and spiritual. And I think you
Mental.
did kind
Well,
of address
mental is
the
that's
obsessive part.
yeah.
Yeah, very good. How can a person tell? I mean, now that we've been talking, it's like, whoa, we've all got this stuff going on. How can a person tell if they're really suffering from abandonment issues that are so severe that they're probably interfering with their ability to bond with people?
A lot of people have an instinct for knowing that, because the people who find their way to my website and my books and my workshops are people who really are going through those issues and who say, what's causing me to feel stuck is my abandonment issues, because they try to get into, let's say, the problem is that they can't seem to find a relationship. They try to get into a relationship, but the vulnerability makes them so anxious that they simply can't tolerate it. So they have trouble. They sabotage it. They act too needy, too dependent, too demanding, or they get cold and stiff, or they do a preemptive strike and they abandon the person. And they kind of have a sense that this is coming from vulnerability that has to do with the fear of rejection, fear of abandonment. Sometimes they don't have a word for it. They hear abandonment, the word, they hear a brief discussion about it, and they say, oh, I have that. There are an awful lot of people who recognize it, and many people, probably just from listening to the broadcast, will say, yes, I can relate to that feeling. So it is something that is, once you know a little bit about it, that's the beginning point. It's when people say, yes, I see that in myself. And then it is something we all have, all. You can't escape it. So therefore, in recognizing that, it's sort of like joining the human race. It's recognizing the universal thing that we all have, but some of us feel it more acutely than others based on what's happening in our lives.
Got it. So how does abandonment affect a person's self-esteem?
Well, when we feel rejected, left behind, it makes us doubt ourselves in this form. I'm not special enough. I'm not enough. I'm not attractive enough. I'm not successful enough. I'm not tall enough. I'm not entertaining enough. I'm not desirable enough. I don't have enough of a self to keep the other person interested. People will blame themselves. Children whose mothers are physically ill will think that they should be able to make mommy well if only they were more special, a better child, more interesting, more funny, more whatever. Children will take almost any kind of loss personally in the form of thinking that they're not special enough. And those feelings accumulate. And when we become adults and experience a rejection in a relationship or in a job where we get fired or we get overlooked or whatever, we begin to doubt our own self-worth. And that self-doubt is low self-esteem. And some of us have it more than others. And it's the cornerstone of abandonment, and it's the cornerstone of abandonment recovery, building a new relationship with yourself.
Got it. So what effect does it have on your ability to interact socially?
It has a huge effect because it can lead to all kinds of what I call outer child patterns, which are the patterns of self-sabotage, because you aren't able to give esteem to yourself, self-esteem. You look for it from outside people, so you become a people pleaser to try to sort of win their esteem of you so that you can make up for the esteem that you don't have for yourself. Or you underachieve because you're afraid to even try to get something for fear that the disappointment will just be too devastating. Or you become an overachiever. It leads to all kinds of behaviors that affect you socially, but here's the biggest one. When you have low self-esteem, you succumb to the need for immediate gratification instead of being able to delay gratification to achieve a long-range goal. So, in other words, let's say you're on a diet, which is a long-range goal. It means you have to delay gratification, and even when you're hungry, you can only eat a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Well, when you don't think enough of yourself, when you have low self-esteem, you want to grab for that quick fix. You want that ice cream because it's immediate pleasure. It's an immediate compensation for not feeling good about yourself. So people with low self-esteem, maybe they don't have diet problems, but maybe they have other areas where they're procrastinating or overspending or over drinking or over nap taking or over book reading, and there are people who overdo it because the immediate gratification is what they need because they don't feel strong enough about themselves to delay the gratification.
Got it. So then they're ending up settling for less because they don't have the time or the patience or the wherewithal to go for the long-term goal. Oh, got it.
And then they're in a vicious cycle.
Exactly. So how does grief and abandonment and abandonment interact?
Well, abandonment does involve it's a grieving process because you're grieving the loss of, let's say, the job, or you're grieving the loss of the dream that you always had, that you would be in a relationship and there isn't one, and you're grieving all of the previous losses. So there is loss involved. But abandonment, the process of abandonment and the process of grief, the different grieving processes are very similar and overlapping, but they also differ in one way. With abandonment, when somebody has left you, you feel, the loss of self-esteem. You take the rage that you feel about the rejection against yourself, and you beat yourself up for letting it happen, for being weak, for not being good enough, etc. With grief over death, unless it was the person chose to die, such as a suicide, with grief over death, it wasn't usually the person's choice. And if not, then you don't have as much of a need to beat yourself up because the person didn't choose to throw you away. You weren't being discarded. So you that part of the grieving process is different. So during that time that the abandonment survivor is going through awful soul searching and just imagining the worst about themselves and feeling worthless and unlovable, a feeling that is like not attachment worthy, the person who's lost someone to death is focusing more on the abject aspect of the loss and all of its ramifications. It's not quite as personal. There's still some personal because, of course, there's the remorse over things you wish you had said or done. There's all that. And there's also a feeling of, I should be feeling better. Why am I suffering so? people tend not to give themselves permission to suffer. They tend to hold themselves to blame for being weak if they suffer too much. But there's some loss of self-esteem, but the two processes are different in that regard to the degree of the loss of self-esteem.
You know, I had an aunt once that she and my uncle divorced, and I was young, and she said to my mother, "I would rather have buried him." And I thought that was such a cold thing to say, but in the light of this, it's starting to make sense to me.
Yeah, because especially with divorce, because the ramifications of divorce last for a long time, because there are the practical dividing of property, which gets into power struggles, which gets into hatred, and people fight by proxy through attorneys.
Yeah.
So
One big mess. One big mess.
Yes.
We're going to have to take another one here, Susan. Susan and I will be back on the flip side of this commercial break. You're listening to The Science of Magic on the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net, the place where altruistic professionals of science and the esoteric create common ground for the betterment of our world. You can always listen to previous transformative broadcasts on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, bringing together gifted people of service to the world. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Susan Anderson. She's the author of the Abandonment Recovery Workbook, as well as Taming Your Outer Child and the Journey from Abandonment to Healing. Susan, we've been talking a whole bunch about what it's like to have abandonment issues and all the downsides. How does one get over them?
Okay, well, the steps toward healing are not something that you think your way through. You do your way through them. So that was the purpose, in fact, for writing the Abandonment Recovery Workbook, because I wanted to find a way to make it, to sort of lay out a path for people to make it easy so that they can just follow along and actually get the work done. And it's doing work. It's the most important work you could ever do, because you're working on that primal abandonment fear. You're not trying to get rid of it, of course. It's primal and it's part of us, and it's a precious part of us. You're trying to work with its energy in a positive way so that it can actually help you build a fantastic new life and a new sense of self and new connection, new love. So it's very important work. And it's a step-by-step process, and one step involves, of course, the awareness. It's only the first step, but it's the awareness of the abandonment issue being very much at heart. And once you have that awareness, it kind of gets that wound to tingle a little bit, which is excellent, because it brings you to the center of the self, the molten core of the self, the very center, that spark in the middle of the universe. And it's lit up a little bit, and you can feel it, and therefore work to bring it to the moment, so that you can let it experience what it feels like to just be, to exist with itself. And then the next very important step to take is, when I say step, I mean this is a baby step process, but the next task at hand is to recognize that in adulthood, all abandonment is really self-abandonment, because we're too old to be abandoned. You know, we can take care of ourselves. So, but we're not too old to feel profoundly abandoned. We are old enough to take care of ourselves, but yet we abandon ourselves in a million ways. And self-abandonment is manifest in the way that we let our patterns of self-sabotage, forestall our goals. It's the way that we forsake ourselves, all the avoidance and the procrastination and chasing the unavailable and all of those kinds of things that we do, the overeating and the overdoing it. So the learning how to reverse self-abandonment is such a significant thing. It involves learning how to take exquisite care of yourself, which is not something one thinks about, one does it. How? Through exercises, not through osmosis, not through reciting, affirmations in the mirror, but by actually doing positive things. And, of course, following the steps of the workbook guide you right through that, so that you're actually doing things that reverse self-abandonment and give yourself love. That's a very important form of raising your self-esteem. There's another piece to the program that has to do with using your imagination in order to create a sense of future, a positive sense of future. You give your mind positive images. The positive image you use, you pretend that it's in the future and that your life has all the elements that you want. And this is an exercise that you don't just think about or hear about, you actually perform. And the exercise, of course, is part of the workbook. But you actually create a positive image and you implant that image in your imagination, in your mind. You use your imagination to create it, and then you keep returning to it, and so that you have it right there, planted in there, so that your mind has this positive image, and it helps to fight off all of the negative stuff that we carry around up there. So that's another very important step. There are quite a few steps, and they lead toward coming through the overcoming self-sabotage and learning how to nurture your feelings and share your feelings with other people. That's a very brief summary of what is a step-by-step, baby-step program.
Well, it sounds to me like built in there is reprogramming the wiring in the brain, really. Isn't that part of what you're doing?
Exactly that.
Yeah.
You're so right. It's physical therapy for the brain. And just like physical therapy, it doesn't happen in a day. You don't go to physical therapy and suddenly you can walk again. You do these exercises that are so gradual that you think, what? This is going to help? But 2 or 3 weeks later, sure enough, you can feel your strength is better and better and better. And it's exactly the same way with abandonment recovery, because you are really reprogramming your brain, and you're doing it incrementally. That's why I say baby steps, because you do a little bit every day, not too much, a little bit every day in a very systematic way, and sure enough, the incremental benefits are felt over time. And it's an amazing thing that your brain actually does change. In fact, studies have shown with certain types of meditation, mindfulness and loving kindness meditation, it improves the left frontal cortex, it stimulates that part of the brain, and yogas who do this all the time have benefit permanently. They have permanent changes in the brain and the actual structure of the brain. So there are these exercises work along very similar lines, and over time you are actually changing your patterns, behavior patterns, which really means your brain is changing.
That's amazing, and it gives you all sorts of new options.
All about.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yes.
We've all heard the saying, someone dying of a broken heart. Let's talk about heartbreak and how it affects us on the physical level.
Well, that's quite interesting because they have broken heart syndrome, which can actually cause a heart attack. It feels like you've gotten a stab wound in the heart, and people talk about heartbreak and stab wound in the heart and all of this. That is because it does affect. It depending on the severity of the blow that you receive, the loss, the hurt. It does affect the heart. In the optimal circumstances, the heart goes back to normal. It's repaired. Everything is fine. But while you're in that incredible state of crisis and fear and hopelessness, you're really feeling it physically, and it's affecting the muscle of your heart in some way. But some people actually don't have the elasticity to be able to withstand that. Many people have died of a broken heart.
That's interesting because they've used that term for so long. You know it has to be anchored in something. And
Yes, it is anchored.
I think we've all experienced taking a blow that's so deep that it almost feels like our heart stops. It's a horrible feeling, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, because sometimes it's breath stopping. And if we stop breathing and we don't have oxygen, well, our heart stops too because it's tied together. So sometimes the first thing that stops, we're unable to breathe. And when that happens, there's a pressure that you feel in the heart. And the immediate impact of the taking, it's sort of like almost it takes your breath away. You hear that expression too.
Exactly.
Because sometimes it's a stomach punch. It's like a severe blow.
Yeah. If you could only offer one suggestion to a person suffering from abandonment, what would it be?
That there's hope, that it feels hopeless, but hopelessness is just a feeling, and you can't take my word for it because a person who's in abandonment is feeling despair and hopelessness, so they can't take anybody's word for anything. But there is hope, and it involves doing tasks, taking the time to actually run through exercises and activities that guide you through the recovery process.
And where can people find your book?
On Amazon, on my website, abandonment.net, and hopefully any bookstore in the library, and online. They can order e-books and so forth. There's lots
great.
of help for abandonment online in my workshops, etc.
Yeah, so you have some nice free things on your website to get people started. Is that correct?
I do, because the website is really a service. The books are sold through Amazon. It's just a link. But my website reaches out with about 120 pages worth of free information about the abandonment issue.
Well, it's such a universal thing, and so many of us suffer needlessly. It's just a beautiful service that you're providing, and thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and the website is again?
Abandonment.net. It's a net that reaches out to anyone who's struggling with any kind of abandonment issue.
And are there classes and stuff they can download there?
Oh, there are. Well, there are workshops they can attend, and what's on the hopper for in a few months, there will be, not podcasts, but videos that give instruction.
Oh, fantastic.
Maybe they're called podcasts.
Susan, thank you so much for being with us. Susan is the author of the Abandonment Recovery Workbook. Her website, www.abandonment.net. This has been The Science of Magic. Remember, you can always listen to past thought-provoking episodes on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. Until next time, dear ones, may you be blessed with knowledge, comforted with love, and never walk alone.